What Crossings does for people who are not preachers is that it allows them to hear a good sermon, even if one might not be preached.
All of my imperfections being smart for generosity.
It's become such a way of life for me.
Crossings is not a sect of Christianity. Crossings is a tool that we use to understand Christianity.
A way of understanding life. It's a lens.
It really is good, and it is something new.
I first came across Crossings when I was a graduate student at the University of Chicago. I was living in housing at the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago, but taking all of my main classes at the Divinity School. One of the teachers I had at the seminary was Bob Bertram. Bob Bertram and Ed Schrader, another theologian that I got to know at that same time, were putting together Crossings events all across the country, and Bob invited me to participate in one of those events in Chicago. So I've been connected with Crossings ever since then and have been blessed to be a presenter. The Crossings method is, I think, a really helpful way to think about how to relate the principal messages that God seeks to convey and present to us to the people in our world today. Essentially, the method runs through three initial steps that are meant to diagnose what is wrong with us as human beings, what are our principal problems. And then the three final steps of a six-step process are meant to reveal, convey, proclaim, teach God's response to those problems. I think it's really a fascinating method that Bob, particularly and Ed, came up with, starting with contemporary problems that all human beings in our culture are wrestling with, some specific problems that they recognize to be problematic in one way or another. And we refer to this as sort of the external problem that people are facing. But that external problem also has an internal dimension, motivation, or a kind of internal perspective. So that's the second step. The Crossings approach indicates, and it's biblical, I think, that our biggest, deepest problem is finally with God and God's judgment of us through God's law. So then the last three steps are meant to kind of deal with each one of those initial three steps as God's response. So initially, that fourth step in God's prognosis, or the prognosis aspect, is to tell us how in some way Christ is the solution to our God problem, and particularly Christ crucified and risen for us. The next step, the fifth step, would be changing our internal relationship, typically focusing on faith and maybe also other responses to the gospel that Christians would have. And then the final step, sort of the goal of that, is now we come back into the world to deal with those external problems and issues, but changed. We now have a new identity in Christ, or a renewed identity in Christ, which equips us now to respond to, engage that problem that we first diagnosed at step one. I think Crossings is important because there are very few organizations in North America that are doing this kind of theological reflection, bringing people from all different walks of life and different vocations or different professions. There's a good mixture of people who are church leaders or church workers in God's church, and lay people who are living out their vocation as Christian in the world. So bringing a variety of people together and inviting them to think together and pray together, worship together, talk with one another about God's words to us today and how we are to understand those words. And there aren't really many organizations like this that I know of that do it in a way that is faithful to the Scriptures, but also experiential, relating to pastors and teachers and professors like me who want to hear how other gospel-focused Christians are seeking to relate the Scriptures of the Bible to our contemporary world.